What was the biggest mistake someone new at your job made? He couldn't find the opening of a garbage bag, so he used some scissors to make his own. What a surprise that was when I pulled out the bag and the contents stayed in the container while the bag was in my hands. Story 2. I'm only in my second year of being a teacher, but last year I witnessed a big mistake by someone who's been teaching for a really long time. This person had been teaching for nearly 30 years, but most of that time was spent as a music teacher. I don't know why they felt the need to make a jump into being an instructional teacher, but they did. One day we were taking our students out to PE, and they were asking me how everything is going. I said that it's going fine, but I am just having a tough time trying to fit in all the subjects and all the standards. The teacher says, "Do you know how I've saved a lot of time? I've stopped teaching reading." I laughed initially because I thought they were joking, but they were not. At one point, they decided that teaching reading wasn't worth it, so they had replaced that time with music time. I believe their students had the worst reading scores in our school, and their class was temporarily taken over by our school's reading coach. They are still employed. Story 3. Putting salt in the cinnamon sugar. Normally, cinnamon and sugar is mixed together to make cinnamon sugar, which goes in apple scrolls and coffee scrolls and on cinnamon donuts. Anyway, this silly human mixed salt and cinnamon together. It all got put out the front and people were buying it and coming back very angry. Or the time the apprentice wasn't careful when topping the cheese rolls and bacon got put on one. A Muslim brought it and was very upset, understandably. He started yelling at my apprentice, calling her a filthy pig. She said, "At least I didn't eat some filthy pig like you did." Needless to say, she didn't last very long. There are people saying negative stuff about Muslims. My problem was that he was a Git, not a Muslim. Story 4. I used to work for Geek Squad. A new guy got confused and reformatted the wrong computer. Customer was understandably pissed. The store ended up having to pay a couple $1,000s to have his data retrieved by a professional data recovery service. Story 5. A couple years back, a guy started at my work and on his first day was reading through all the SOPs and various other job-specific stuff when he fell asleep. Now granted, this isn't good, but the new boss made him come in at 4:30 a.m. to match her insane schedule for some reason. His new boss walked in and the following conversation took place. New boss: "Hey, wake up." Guy: "Sorry about that, this stuff is just so boring." New boss: "Really? Because I wrote those SOPs." Guy: silent. New boss: "Well, I don't want this job to get in the way of your sleeping schedule. Perhaps you should go find something more suitable." So yeah, dude was fired within the first 30 minutes. But, plot twist, that new guy wasn't the one who made the mistake. A couple years later, pretty recently, that dude shows back up at our place as an auditor. I'm in the biotech industry, and we have audits from our customers on a regular basis. He was now going to spend a day auditing the new boss who had fired him for something that we all, the rank-and-file scientists, saw as pretty petty. Anyway, he performed the audit and got way up her ass on even the most minute details. And the audit went so bad that his company eventually started buying product from a different company. So her callousness at something minor, at least in our eyes, a few years back ended up costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars a few years down the road. Story 6. They don't bother to train anyone they send to wash dishes at my work. They just throw them in the pit and tell them to do the job. Sometimes that leads to catastrophic "what the hell do I do" related failure. One thing that is never explained is that you are supposed to change the dishwater in your machine to keep the dishes actually coming out clean, because the machine reuses the same water over and over. One line cook got sent into the pit on my day off. Never changed the water once. By 8 p.m., the white plates were coming out butter-colored and speckled with ash. Rather than figure out something was amiss and ask how to fix it, he instead took to wiping down each individual plate with a rag so that the slime wasn't as obvious, then sent them out to have people eat food off of them. Health department would have had a conniption if they heard about that. I know I did. Story 7. Well, firstly, they were late on the first day. Following that, after about an hour, then they asked how to open the program. They said they were proficient in operating, which was required for their job. Story 8. My vet tech instructor worked at a zoo in the past, and there was a co-op vet tech student there who had just finished her program. She was very headstrong and did things the way she wanted them done, not the proper way. Well, there was this rare possum, last breeding male in captivity of its species, who had a cold or something. So they had it in the ICU so it would have the best care, as it was so rare, and it was very important he didn't pass. It was time to give him his pain medication. For those not from the medical world, this substance is given subcutaneous. In animals, it is given anywhere, under loose skin. You can lift and inject underneath. This is commonly done at the base of the neck. Tense skin inject, done. So, my instructor's in charge of the co-op student, both in the ICU. The student insists she can give the injection, so my instructor gives her the go-ahead as it is a simple procedure, and she's been trained. You really can't mess up easily. So this girl goes to inject at the base of the neck, but isn't lifting the skin out of the way. Instructor says how to do it correctly, and the student refuses and insists. She was taught at school that she didn't have to tent the skin. After a mild dispute, the instructor says, "Whatever, he will be fine," and the student proceeds with the injection. Well, doesn't the possum start seizing? She had given him the injection into his spine. You couldn't do that so easy if you tried. At worst, she could theoretically given the injection into muscle, not the spine. Anyways, he passed soon after. The last breeding male in captivity passed because of the student's ignorance. I'm pretty sure my instructor wrote her name down so she would never accidentally hire her in the future. Story 9. At my old job. This was called the perfect storm. I worked in a call center for an oil field. The foreman would call in oil. We'd type in the order number, create an order for the oil to be picked up by our trucks, and send it off to dispatch. The poor call center girl got the number off by 1 digit. So instead of picking up oil in the eastern part of our state, they picked it up in the western part of our state. Now, usually this wouldn't be a major issue, but this particular time, the oil that was supposed to be picked up was H2S. H2S oil is extremely poisonous. The foreman, knowing he'd done his job, left for the weekend. The H2S oil kept pumping, filled up to max, and spilled over the edge and onto the ground. This is where it gets expensive. The EPA has to come out and assess. We are fined for that, of course. There also happens to be a farmer who lives right next to the pump. His soil is tainted for the next 7 years. Not only do we have to pay fines, we have to pay this farmer for his crops. That won't happen now. $15 million mistake, because 1 digit was off. Story 10. I had a new guy ring me for some tech support. He didn't like the answer I gave him, so he gave me a mouthful of abuse and then slammed the phone down. We worked for different departments in a global company. I don't know where I was located, but the 10 paces that took me straight to his desk must have been quite a shock. Story 11. When I was a private dancer, a fellow dancer new to the club sharted in a lap dance, apparently due to some medication she was taking. I think it was a pretty big mistake. Story 12. They stacked donuts on top of one another when heating them in this conveyor belt type machine. The donuts and machine caught on fire. I work at a cinema, so burning things happens on the reg. Poor girl was not having a good day though. She ended up covered head to toe in mango frozen yogurt later that night thanks to a faulty machine. Never laughed so hard in my life. Story 13. I'm a dispatcher. When I was new, I took a call for a cat in a tree. My boss said, ask them if they've ever seen a cat skeleton in a tree. Apparently, she was being sarcastic. Story 14. A guy at work was told to go to the roof of a 4-story building, tie a rope grab to an anchor, and come back down. He took this literally and used the rope to slide down the building. He had no gloves on and proceeded to burn through his skin on his hands down to his bone as he held on for dear life. Story 15. I work in it. We had a guy around September of last year who vehemently refused to look anything up. He was a stubborn older guy who thought he knew it all. The CEO of one of our clients had an iMac in his office that wouldn't boot up at all. The new guy was sent in and immediately declared it FUBAR. The guy trusted his judgment and bought a whole new iMac. I don't remember the issue, but it was a 20-minute fix in safe mode when he brought the iMac back to our office. His excuse was, I didn't think Macs could do that. We lost that client, and Dave got fired. Story 16. I managed a delivery service for nearly 10 years. At one point, the owner decided to merge with a national company that handled our orders out of Texas. We are in Nashville, TN. This merger sucked and lasted less than a year. It was horribly inefficient. Since our orders are now dispatched out of Dallas, we would sometimes get orders for wrong states, etc. Another feature of our new orders was the addition of directions, and they were correct maybe a third of the time. Example, you'd get an order from Chili's going 2 blocks down street, and the directions would tell you to go to Memphis and back to get to the customer. Seriously, we had to drill into everyone. Ignore those directions at all costs. We don't care if they're right. Use the map we gave you and don't hesitate to call us on the radio. We didn't have any problems until this one kid was hired. He was a stoner that hit it badly, and he wouldn't listen. He wasn't a bad kid, really, and I kind of liked him, but he just wouldn't listen. You'd stand there and talk to him, and you could see his eyes glaze over. Then, 10 minutes later, he'd ask you about what he was supposed to do. I'm sure you can see where this is going. He's been there maybe 4 days, and I've been restricting him to the simple close orders within 5 miles of the restaurant. He gets lost all the time anyway, pre-phone and GPS days. So after being lost for half an hour looking for a 7-story building with its frigging name written across the top, you could see this for miles. I sent him on an order so easy even he couldn't screw it up. So I thought. It was literally across the street from the restaurant. He followed the directions on the order that sent him to Cincinnati, freaking Ohio. After about 45 minutes, the customer called, wondering where her food was. I started trying to reach him on the radio. No answer. I redo her food and send another driver with it. After 3 hours of radio silence, I get a call from a gas station clerk outside of Louisville, Kai. He puts Kit on the phone. He's nearly in tears. He's lost somewhere on the outskirts of Louisville. Out of gas, no money. He'd spent like $3 in quarters on payphones trying to call anybody, but not knowing how area codes work apparently. He just kept getting his quarters eaten. The reason I couldn't get him on the radio was he'd turned it off so he could jam to his road trip music on his cruise through Kentucky. Even though I was beyond irritated at him, I felt so bad for him. I wound up paying gas station guy over the phone for a tank of gas for him. We had a little laugh at his expense. He told me not to be too hard on him. I wasn't going to be anyway, called his mom for him, and explained he was going to be home late. She was a total dingbat git, which explained where he gets it from. She didn't listen either. He's in Louisville, say where? Kentucky. Rambles about what a good kid he was. Where is he? Kentucky, ma'am. Oh, Kentucky. They do horse races there. The next day, my boss has a nice chat with him and placed him with another driver for more training. But he ultimately wound up quitting a few days later. I wonder what happened to him sometimes. Story 17. She heated her food inside aluminum foil in the microwave. The sparks of light and smell didn't faze her. She considered this normal. She was a super pretty, middle-aged woman. Story 18. I was working at an electronics manufacturing company. They put components in circuit board. One of the steps in the process was running the completed boards through a router to cut them out of a panel. Many boards would come with multiples and panels to make building them easier and faster. Then, we cut them out at the end of the process. A new guy had been on the job 3 or 4 days, and I was training him to run the router. I set it up for him. We ran a few panels and inspected them. Everything was fine, so he was left on his own. Shortly after this, the cutting bit broke, and instead of asking for help to put a new one in, he just put one in on his own and called it good. The problem was, he put the wrong bit in. So now as he cut the edge off of one of the components, and he didn't realize it until he had all 500 boards cut. They had to get new components, then removed each one by hand, and solder a new one in place by hand. It took many hours of labor, and the part was expensive. It was a very expensive mistake. He was let go the next day. So this blew up overnight. Here's some info for those who have posted. First, I was not in charge of this guy. I was told to set the machine up and show him how to run it, which was simple. You just load the board, push the button, and when it is done, remove the board. Then my boss sent me elsewhere to work on something else. The boss was 10 feet from where this guy was, and he never asked for help, nor did my boss ever check on him. Second, it only took about an hour to cut all these boards, so the damage happened quickly. Third, the guy had no experience on this machine at all. He had never run it and knew nothing about how to change bits, etc. He just decided to do it in order to show he could solve problem. Last, I felt very bad when they fired him because I felt like he was trying to do the right thing and it backfired on him. Story 19. Back in 1999, when I was about 20, I was working as the lead technical support analyst for an online banking software company. The company's product was the software. Banks were our clients. My manager had hired this drop-dead, gorgeous Indian girl for our team and had me train her. She had a master's in computer science from an Indian university, no work experience, and didn't seem to know anything about computers. Granted, I was a super arrogant 20-year-old at the time, but I remember boggling that she didn't even know what a command line was, let alone how to code or write scripts. Anyway, of course, because of her degree, my boss put her exclusively on our biggest client, Amex. One of our processes that happened nightly is to process bill pay. We used a third-party bill pay vendor to process these payments. The refresh was data sent in real time to that vendor, and this happened nightly for all our clients. They would take this data, auto-ake the money from the end users' accounts, and send payments off to bill pay recipients. Amex, being the biggest customer we had, processed something like $3 million in bill pay payments every day. One of the Amex nightly bill pay processes breaks. The file processed in real time, a little over halfway through and then stopped. Generally, when this happens, there was a bad character in a payee, address, or something. The software we used was purchased from a third party, and we didn't own the source. So all we could do was fix mistakes. Normally, our process was to open the refresh file, find the payment that broke, truncate all of the payments before it, fix the broken one, and resubmit from the newly fixed payment on this hiree had been trained on this process numerous times. So she comes into the office in the morning and is notified of the process break. What does she do? Submits the entire file again, and of course, it breaks again. She does this 8 times before coming to get me to ask me what to do. She processed over half of this bill pay file in real time, probably $2 million in payments, 8 additional times before coming to get me. The cluster duck was immense. It took the entire company days to unduck what she did. Not only did X amount of customers now get their bill pays processed 9 times, but overdrafts, fees, etc. from the processes that came after to notify the banks of the charges, which happened automatically. It's been a while, but I remember that it ended up costing the company over $1 million in people's time, lost revenue, and lost funds. When I left about 6 months later, she was still there, still supporting the biggest client. The division of that company that handled the online banking piece was shut down a few years later. Story 20. Dropped another employee from the top of a climbing wall as they were being taught how to belay, causing them to break their back. Same year, another girl hitched a horse incorrectly her first week on the job. The horse got spooked, reared back, and with her hand still holding the hitch, her finger got cinched in the hitch she tied and she lost a finger. She came a few months later and worked the front desk instead. Story 21. At the night shift at a small mental hospital, new guy wants to watch movies at the nurses' station's computers, but can't under the hospital's OS. So he decides to try to install Linux. Fails and computer won't boot to anything. Doesn't tell anyone. He didn't get fired, but wasn't allowed to go into a room where there was a computer, which was anywhere but a hallway. So he had to work night shifts completely in the hallway. Story 22. I used to work as a service station attendant, and there was a new guy at work who fell asleep at the counter. A larger woman, customer, stood at the counter and rapped on the counter. He got startled awake and exclaimed, "You fatty woman scared me." Needless to say, she complained big time to the boss. Story 23. I was training a new employee recently when he told me that he'd be 4 hours late for his training the following day, as he had training for another job. Story 24. We had a 17-year-old kid come in to do some work experience at our engineering firm. That week, we also had a relatively new starter come into our team from another office hoping to move to the city. So our new starter asked the 17-year-old kid to do some photocopying prep for an important meeting he had that afternoon and desperately needs some drawing. The poor kid wasn't told what to do and ended up breaking the machine to the point we needed a call out to fix it. New guy lost his crap and started swearing at the poor kid, calling him a useless piece of crap. Everyone could hear across the office from the copy room. Our director overheard and came to investigate. It was the director's son on placement. The new disappeared pretty quickly. Story 25. When I worked at a retirement plan call center during the global recession, we had some new Git kid on his first solo day on the phones making outrageous promises to every caller, saying they were either getting their money back or getting a guaranteed profit on investments in the open market. What? Not only can you not do that, it's illegal to promise investors a specific rate of return on a variable investment. Worst part was customers called him on it and said that didn't sound right, and his response was, "I'm on a recorded line. Everything I say has to happen." He was let go fairly quick. For the record, as rainbow and butterflies as this guy sounds, that's not the way it is. And if someone tries to tell you that they're taking you for a ride 90% of the time, the other 10% are idiots like this. Story 26. Worked in a salon. We had one girl fill up a big sink with detergent and proceed to wash up our color bowls with the coffee cups. We ended up throwing away the coffee cups because we didn't want to accidentally poison a client. And before anyone asks, we had made it very clear to her that there were separate sinks for each and to not mix them up. The problem wasn't the detergent, which was a standard dishwashing detergent. The problem was the color bowls. Serving up coffee to people with potential traces of ammonia and hydrogen peroxide and various other chemicals is a bad idea. It wasn't my call to throw away the cups. Our boss said it had to be done, so be it. Story 27. He did a tire change and put the tires back on, but only tightened the lug nuts a few times by hand loosely. They're then supposed to be secured with a torque to whatever setting. But he forgot to do that, so the customers driving down the highway, when they finally come loose and the tires just fly off. Yeah. Story 28. Certainly not the biggest mistake I've ever seen, but this sticks out in my memory. When I was an RN working in the ICU, every July we'd have a fresh crop of residents, doctors fresh out of med school. Many were very nice. One or two were, and often would stay, flaming a holes, and most felt nurses were just waitresses. This superiority complex usually died down substantially in the first 3 weeks, when the nurses in my IQ would prove their knowledge and earn their respect, but it would often be a rough 2 to 3 weeks for us nurses. One July on the first day, they began on the unit. I assisted one resident in putting in a central line, internal jugular IRC. He inserted it and then said to the patient, "All done," but he very much was not. I made some excuse to talk to him outside of the room. Something like, "Doctor, could you help me choose the right supplies for the next phase of the procedure?" Or whatever. Out of earshot of the patient, I whispered to him that he needed to suture the line in place. He had no idea what I was talking about. Sheesh, men never read instructions. So I told him how to do it. Luckily for me, he was nice and didn't go off on me for correcting him. We went back in the room together and I made some transitional statement, so the patient would never know the doctor omitted a pretty important part of the procedure. The resident put in the sutures as I instructed, and there was absolutely no harm to the patient. After, he took me aside and said, "My wife is an RN. She told me nurses would save my ass. I just never guessed it would be on my first day. Thank you." Story 29. I was working as a dispatcher for an intercity trucking company near Toronto. Allow me to explain, we have a daily run to Montreal. At the same time, Montreal has a daily run to Toronto. Rather than have my Toronto driver go all the way to Montreal and sleep in his truck, what happens is that he drives to Kingston, about halfway. The Montreal guys also drive to Kingston. Then, they switch trailers, and the Montreal driver picks up the freight from Toronto and takes it back home to Montreal. My Toronto driver picks up the trailer from Montreal and brings it back home to Toronto. This is called a Kingston switch and is a very common practice in pretty much every trucking company in both Montreal and Toronto. Can you see where this is going? Montreal hires 2 new guys right out of trucking school and dispatches them each a Kingston switch load. I have 2 loads bound for Montreal headed down the highway. The 2 idiots go to Kingston and switch trailers with each other, then head back to Montreal when they get back to their yard. They drop the trailers and head home to bed. Well, I get a call about 4 a.m. from my guys, wondering where the Montreal guys are. The phone lines burn up for an hour before we can sort this all out. We managed to work something out with backup drivers, but it cost us a lot of time. Problem was, one of the loads was temperature-sensitive medication, and it was in a heat wave in the summer. The reefer unit ran out of fuel, and the temps climbed out of safe range. The entire shipment was trashed, and the crap storm that followed was legendary. The shipper was claiming millions in damages, and we were holding to a $2 per pounds liability. People were depending on this medicine, and it created a regional shortage. That was resolved by air freighting replacement medication from all over the continent, all because 2 gits didn't see anything wrong with driving 2 trailers down the highway and then bringing them both back to Montreal. Story 30. I worked at a beach park in college. We had a new hire come midway through a work schedule, so the supervisor had him doing odd jobs on the when we have time list. New hires were provisional, and the guy was trying to make a career out of it, so he did everything super thoroughly and fast. He'd eaten up about half of the list before the supervisor sent him to the dunes. There was a patch of dune we had that was being held together mostly by poison ivy. Not ideal, but you don't have a lot of options with dunes, so it had to be left to do its thing. Problem was, it was starting to crowd the boardwalk we had going through to the beach. If left alone, we'd start getting visitors with rashes. No bueno. So the super sent him there with gloves, shears, and a bucket, asking him to make sure the boardwalk was clear of foliage. The new guy comes back to the station 15 minutes later. You see, he was so gung-ho he decided he didn't need gloves or shears to do the job, and laid into the mostly poison ivy with his bare hands. By the time he'd made it back to the station, it looked like he had Hulk hands in an angry red. The super rushed him to the emergency room. His first job the day he came back to work was to learn to identify poison ivy. Story 31. I worked for a construction company that specializes in high-tech plumbing jobs. What the hell is a high-tech plumbing job, you might ask? It's a fine question, and the first thing I asked when I interviewed to work there. Nuclear power plants are mostly plumbing, with very specialized protocols and tolerances. Military installation, Air Force bases need specialized plumbing systems to deliver fuel and hydraulic fluids when refueling fighter jets, etc. So, this is the company's specialty. Naturally, jobs are few and far between, but they have a huge profit margin because of the specialization. All sorts of certifications and government clearances are required. And when contracting with the government, they're very strict about the bidding process. If a bid process closes at noon on May 30th, it closes at 12 o'clock on May 30th. No exceptions. So the company had been working for the past 18 months on this huge make-or-break bid, some massive $100 million job, tens of thousands of man-hours, and thus millions of dollars, sunk into the planning and estimating phase. They sent the CEO's right-hand man to hand, deliver the bid, as was required in DC. He got there 10 minutes late. Edit. Lots of people have been asking. He was sent down there the day before. DC is only a 40-minute flight from here, so he arrived the day before the bid was due, but after business hours. The bid was to close at 2 p.m. the next day. That gave him 6 hours that day. The office opened at 8 a.m. to travel the 7 or 8 blocks from his hotel to the office to deliver the bid. I don't know why he missed it. I'm no longer at the company, but we'll try to find out. Story 32. A new nurse I worked with was given a report to give 200 milligrams of an IV medication and that it hadn't arrived yet. When it arrived from the pharmacy and she drew it up, instead of the 2 milliliters that she was used to seeing. The dose was 20 milliliters. We usually drew that medication up in a 5 milliliter syringe, but she's now standing there holding two 10-milliliter syringes. She walks down the hall and asks two experienced nurses if the dose seems right to them. They both ask her what the physician's order says. She shows it to them and they say, "If that's what it says, then that's what you give." I witnessed and overheard all this as I was prepping some of my own meds in a nearby area, but had no idea what medication they were talking about. An hour later, the new nurse comes running out of her patient's room, and we wind up coding that guy because his blood pressure is pretty much nothing over tiny. When we're reviewing what's been going on, trying to figure out what happened to this previously stable patient, she says, "All I've done tonight is give the 200 milligrams of medication." My jaw drops. The doctor's just standing there, sputtering, and the two experienced nurses scuttle out of the room like cockroaches caught in the light. Fortunately, she did say that it saved the guy's life. He spent some time in ICU and was fine afterward. Fast forward a week, and I hear that new nurse is about to get fired over some huge mistake. I figured it had to be the medication error, so I went to the boss and asked about it apparently, when asked. The two cockroaches told the boss they warned new nurse the dose was too much and she should call the pharmacy. I relayed that I'd been there and seen and heard what happened. My story matched the new nurses, who had actually called the pharmacy and was told that's what the doc ordered and it was fine. Story, and she got off with having to do a presentation about medication safety and how to double-check dosing if it was in question. Story 33. New guy left a freezer door propped open overnight and ruined thousands of dollars worth of food. The boss shrugged it off and gave the guy a lecture, told him not to do it again. Sadly, most of the rest of the staff bullied him about it until he quit a week later. Story 34. This new employee parked in the CEO's reserved parking spot, thinking he was away, and he was not. He was severely reprimanded, but still employed there, thankfully. Story 35. I work in a group home. The kids aren't allowed to talk about substances, alcohol, crime, etc., unless it is one-on-one with the staff and they are wanting to discuss their past or just get things off their chest. Anyways, sometimes the boys would talk about it to get a rise out of us staff or try to be cool in front of everyone. Well, this new girl was on her first observation shift that evening. It was me, her, another female staff, 4 young girls, and this teenage want-to-gangster. He starts talking about substances, bragging about how he does it all the time. I tell him to shut his trap and keep coloring his poster. He stops talking for a bit, then gets going again. I give him the option to either stop talking about substances or be removed from the group. At that point, this new girl decides that she wants to stand up for this boy and let everyone know her stance on pot legalization. He now has an adult supporting him and is talking about substances. I tell her to stop talking and to meet me in the hall after I'm done taking this boy to his room for a talk. Anyways, I end having to restrain a 300-pounds boy because of it. Wasn't fun. Afterwards, I tell her why what she did was completely inappropriate. Afterwards, I tell my and he tells her not to come back. Story 36. Another story used to work as a general manager for a limousine company many years back. I, in the process of hiring a new employee that, on paper, had plenty of experience in the business, with 6 years under his belt. I called for references using the numbers he provided and all disconnected. I looked a few of the companies up online and called them by couldn't get anyone to validate his previous employment. He appeared legit and highly knowledgeable of the business and what to do. I started him that weekend but kept a close watch on him. He got a simple run of taking a bunch of partygoers to a club and back again. No cash? Credit card was approved already, used lots of precaution. Toward the end of the night, the credit card company we use for our gas cards called to confirm activity or possible fraud on an account. Sure enough, the duck-up attempted to use the Chevron gas card in a department store and left in a hurry. He ditched the limo in the store parking lot and took the limo keys with him. I had to pick up the passengers in a different limo about an hour or so later. They were confused as to why they had a new driver and limo. Told them the other broke down, but since none of their personal effects were left in the other car, it was a simple exchange. They were none the wiser. Aftermath. Called the cops on the guy and gave them everything I had on the guy. Picture, employment application, notes on the references I called on, etc. The CC was already reported stolen, and I had to get the limo rekeyed and the alarm reprogrammed. I stashed it in a different lot, using our spare key until everything was sorted out. Cost us $700 for all that trouble, and I don't know if they ever caught the guy. One of my employees later told me he saw a guy lurking around our limo lot one night months later. He matched the description of that employee. I assumed he tried to steal the limo using the key he kept. The surveillance footage didn't capture, but a silhouette of the guy. Story 37. I worked at an injection molding plant. Guy was changing a mold out and forgot step 2, unclamp the mold from the machine. He took the crane up, heard a massive crash, and realized he pulled 2 of the presses anchors out of the ground. Story 38. Someone I know, couldn't have been me, worked in retail and accidentally put their register into training mode, where it acts normal. But when you tender a transaction, no one's card actually gets charged. Tendered about 6 or 7 transactions like this. It costs thousands, and there were literally no repercussions, except bosses told him not to do it again. Story 39. Manager told the new guy to drop a bag of Moz sticks in the fryer for me. He acted a little confused, then said, okay, and dropped the whole bag, unopened, into the fryer. Story 40. I cost the company I worked for $22,000 in time lost and damages. I was a press operator at a stamping factory that made essentially the roll cage for Hondas. Blank, flat sheets of metal were fed through dies that formed the sheets. Fingers that pick up the sheets have sensors on them in case the blank isn't picked up. I was still new at 3 weeks in, working through a temp service. I was only trained for 3 days to run the press. At the point of the duck up, we were very behind schedule, working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and stress levels were really high. The sensors went off. Press stopped. I checked everything, and to my knowledge, everything was fine. I started it back up. The press ran 4 rotations, and my stackers stopped the press. Showed me a double blanked part. Oh, damn. I go to check the dies, and my heart sinks. 3 dies were cracked in multiple places. Die maintenance came and said I ducked up good. A few days later, I learned I cost the company $22,000. Wasn't fired because it wasn't my fault. One of the sensors was faulty, luckily for me. I should have seen the double blank. I quit a few weeks later because I never received proper training and hated that I couldn't run it right, causing low number resulting in overtime for everybody. And I probably typed this for no one to see. Story 41. First day working with a new construction crew. I was to meet my new supervisor at the local McDonald's to follow him out to the construction site. I arrived to find they'd hired 2 new guys, me and someone else. The boss pulls up in his truck and tells us both to follow it. Me and the other guy, each in our own vehicles, follow the boss through the parking lot to where we turn out onto the main road. Boss turns left, I turn left. New guy turns right and drives off the wrong way. We never saw or heard from him again. Cell phones don't work out in the mountains where we were, so you got to meet people in person. No telling why that guy turned the wrong way, but sometimes I still wonder about that guy. Such a strange way to start your first day at a new job. Guess he didn't need the money as bad as me. Turns out to be the best construction crew I've ever been on. That guy has no idea what he missed. Story 42. Not the biggest mistake, but by far the funniest. I used to work at a windscreen replacement shop, and we had a new guy in on his first day of hands-on work. It was my job to supervise him, and for some reason, we had about 5 VW Passat screens to replace that day. Now, the scuttle, the plastic tray that sits just over the bottom front windscreen frame and is partially covered by the closed bonnet, can be tricky to lift out without breaking, as you have to squeeze it from both sides as you lift it, causing it to belly out in the middle. It was a really hot day, and working under the bonnet, over a warm engine in a shop with no air conditioner, was taking its toll on the guy. The first 3 scuttles broke, and I could see the frustration building in his pudgy little face as it got redder and redder. I took over at this point and had him watch me remove the scuttle from the 4th car. Nice and slow. He watched every move I made, saw the technique I used, and after a pep talk, a cold drink and a glass of water, agreed that he would remove the scuttle from the final car. The normal time frame for a job like this is about 20 minutes, but I asked the customer to come back for her car in an hour and a half, and she agreed. So he's taken out the clips from the panel and slowly pulling the scuttle out, being ever so gentle. Snap. The thing cracks right in 2. I look at him and he's holding the 2 pieces in his hand, sweat dripping from this bright red face. He screams, "Damn!" walks out the shop door and was never seen again. Story 43. Worked doing audio-video installations. We were in a school system, and we asked new guy to pull a wire from the 1st to the 5th floor through a cable chase. Typically, this involved pushing a fish tape or other semi-rigid wand through the path, attaching the new cable, and then pulling the wand out with new cables following. Fish tapes are usually bright plastic, pink, or orange. That detail comes back later. So new guy gets his instruction and proceeded to the 1st floor closet to prep for the pull. He sees the fish tape is already there, but it's stuck. He pulls on it, can't free it up, decides to just cut it and re-tape the end. He attaches the new wires, heads up to the 5th floor to pull up the fish tape. He gets there and can't find the fish tape. Typically, it's very obvious. It's a disc about 20 feet across that the tape spools onto. Can't miss them, but it's not there. Our intrepid installer checks the 5th floor and the 3rd floor closet, but no fish tape. On the 2nd floor, he finds the tape in the wall but no spool, and it's here he notices the tape is being run down a different cable path. Something's odd here. Then our site lead walks in, carrying the fish tape. You know what else is bright plastic orange and in walls? Fiber. The guy cut the district's data backbone fiber to use it as a pull string. Story 44. I used to work as an assistant on night trains all over Europe. Fun student job, lots of tips. We were supposed to try and sell breakfast to our customers for a small commission. No one bothered about the commission, so not many were actually sold. We did get 2 breakfasts for ourselves, though, which we weren't supposed to sell, of course. Generally, what happened was that you would try to sell your own breakfast for the full price and grab some cheap food in a railway buffet. I recall a newbie on the job who was quick to learn and cleverly sold his breakfasts on his first ever trip. When we arrived back in Brussels, where we were based, one of the manager guys of the firm was greeting us and asked about the sales. "Sold some of those breakfasts?" he asked. Said the new kid, "Just my 2 personal ones, man. Never saw him again on of my shifts." Story 45. Expect someone at the next stage in a bureaucratic process to care as much as he did or move as fast as he did. His spirit was broken soon enough, like mine. Story 46. So we are providing ERP system for this random UK steel service company. Huge factory, slits of steel, cutting, and mixed with bit of other metal business. They had those huge ovens there and stuff. It was a year or 2 before I started working there, so don't know full details. But it goes like this. We prepped some update for a specific part of the company to be installed over the weekend. The part was installed, worked correctly, no problem. Their new and very initiative admin decided that because the update worked really well, he will install it to the other parts of the system as well, for which it wasn't made, at Sunday evening. Long story short, everything went down. No production was done at all in the whole ducking factory complex. Trucks were stacked outside in a massive queue several times around the block. The whole factory was running as a supplier to customers who mostly operate GIT, and those massive foundries that never stop actually stopped. That is really bad news. The factory complex was pretty much off for several days, and it took weeks to get back into standard production. Fun times, really. I actually have quite a few stories like this, but this one was probably the biggest, if I remember correctly. Story 47. I used to work outside at a swimming pool shop. Me and the new guy were filling jugs of chlorine before it was break time for me. Once my break was over, I came back to find a lake of chlorine had engulfed the yard. From what I remembered, it was 2,000 gallons of the stuff, at $9 per 5 gallon. You do the math. They fired him for it. The guy who got hired afterwards was always high. A week into his employment, he rammed the forklift onto a pallet of muriatic acid, spilling it across the yard. But he wasn't fired for that. No. The next day, he ended up smoking a joint inside the shop. In the bathroom. Bonus, I ended up back-ending my boss's Ford F-150 with the forklift. Really, it was just the bumper. I had to pay $500 via check deductions or get fired. Yup. I hate that job. Story 48. I work at a zoo and we have some pretty dangerous animals. Lions, a tiger, grizzlies. Oh my. So every single employee has to carry on them a can of super strength bear mace, like the kind you can't just go buy at a self-defense store. This stuff is made to stop a raging insert any animal here in its tracks and can cause skin irritation and even nausea without even touching you. Anyway, this one seasonal girl saw a can sitting by her computer at the main lobby. It says across the front counter spray, as in like counter-attack spray. But she thought it was counter as in indoor countertop, computer desk spray. So long story short, we had to evacuate one of the largest buildings in the zoo, also the only building where we could sell tickets. It was so bad, people on the 3rd floor of the building were having trouble breathing before they even got word of what happened. Bonus story. One employee was out in the booth at the main gate with all the windows and doors closed. They were curious what color the spray was. Didn't end very well for them. Story 49. I was in the Coast Guard as a navigator on C-130s, so I sat up front in the cockpit. We had a fairly new co-pilot doing some training. So we're done for the day and we're landing when the pilot throws out a curveball and takes number 1 engine away from the co-pilot as a test. It's a normal thing to do on training flights. The pilot pulls back number 1 engine lever, simulating a lost engine. Pick for reference. Left set of levers are engine throttle. The number 1 engine lever is the leftmost one. The co-pilot has the controls and is doing fine. We land normally and all is well until it's time to reverse engines to slow down. He grabs the throttle levers, remembers that 1 is simulated dead. He then proceeds to grab 3 and 4 engine levers, confusing 2 engine lever for 1. So we're barreling down the runway at about 90 knots. He puts 3 and 4 into reverse, giving us full reverse on the right wing, and off we go hard to the right. We almost depart the runway if it were not for the flight engineer and pilot taking immediate action to correct our trajectory. Our holes were puckered and the co-pilot was taunted appropriately for the remainder of the day. Story 50. I worked at garden nursery with a bunch of mulch and rock that we sold for people to fill in their yards with. A particular rock called river rock is quite heavy. One day a newbie who was just trained on the Bobcat gets the opportunity to dump the rock into the back of this guy's new Dodge Ram. I explicitly tell the customers that some rock will fall to the sides and scratch his truck due to dumping rock being very difficult. I'm spotting this new kid and everything is going well, then the customer just starts flipping out, like screaming bloody murder for the Bobcat driver to stop. Well, when you start screaming at a new Bobcat driver, they tend to forget the controls. Sure, enough instead of raising the boom back up, he instead dumps the rest of the load in the back. Then, instead of pulling the boom up, he pushes it down right through the bed of this guy's truck. Like a can of soup being opened, it was that easy. It honestly was very impressive how easily the Bobcat tore through the truck. Either way, the customer's livid and just turns around silently and walks into our office. The boss comes out, "This, boys, is why you pay for insurance." Story 51. New guy. 1. Started off his first day by going into the network manager's office and listing off all of the deficiencies with the network. Didn't last a week. New guy. 2. Fell asleep during one-on-one training. Manager just left him there. Hygiene gradually deteriorated to the point that management had to talk to him several times. Then got fired for that, and being grossly incompetent after nearly a year, threatened to sue. New guy 3 was technically hired at the same time as me, but required near constant supervision for the first 4 months. Hated me for it. Slept at his desk, casually insulted other employees to their face. Would tell callers to call back and ask for tech support. He was tech support. Freaked out and punched me in the middle of the office. Hit on the managers and VP's wives at the Xmas party. Was never actually fired, but put in his 2 weeks notice after about 6 months. Somehow managed to become an even crappier employee in that time, and was told to just not come back after a week. And it didn't stop there. He actually listed out company as a reference. We got a call during a staff meeting, and the VP took it right there with everyone in the room. It was fantastic. Story 52. My dad works in a plant making diesel engines. A huge iron block is picked up by chains, brought to the next station, and brought down. My dad was at the next station. A lady, who, my apologies, was not new to the job, slipped the chains on the block, but neglected to properly bolt it on. Up it goes, over my father's head, and then down it goes. The minute the crank went up, she began to scream that it wasn't attached. My dad, as he likes to put it, reached back to the speed I had in 1979 and hustled out of the way, literally diving on a concrete floor to become clear of the massive iron engine block. It smashed to the ground. He escaped unscathed except for a hefty bruise on the shoulder from his impromptu dive. She was escorted off the floor screaming, "I could have lost him!" and was put on a 2-week suspension, and I think retrained. Story 53, finally a thread I can contribute to. I work at a pool supply store in Florida. We try to hire our newbies during the off-season, September, March, so they don't get overwhelmed, and it tends to work out for us, except for this one scenario. We have this new guy, let's call him Kevin. Kevin is a complete ducking duck up. He's a duck up. One day while Kev was filling chlorine jugs, he had a pretty large spill. We have procedures we follow to clean the spill and to limit the time spent in air filled with chemicals. Kevin said duck that procedure and grabbed the first spray bottle he saw and started cleaning. Apparently, he didn't notice the bright red label on the spray bottle that read ammonia. For those who don't know what happened when you mix ammonia and chlorine, bleach it creates a concoction similar to, but not as deadly as mustard gas. This wouldn't have been a problem if he would have alerted someone right away. But we only found out when everyone in the store found it hard to keep their eyes open. Damn you, Kevin. Story 54. At my old job, software development and maintenance, we got this newly educated genius, smart as hell, and put her on a few smaller assignments which she managed well, just to know her level. After a few months, we decided to put her on a task for an extremely important client. The task was simple enough. The client wanted old or expired files and data entries removed from their SharePoint site. She wrote a program that would go through all files and delete them if they met the criteria, or at least so she thought. She hadn't tested it, no unit test, nor any hypothetical tests. She just ran it. She stopped the program after a few minutes when she noticed something was wrong. By that time, the program had deleted 8 months' worth of client data. No backups, no recycle bin, no nothing. We didn't fire her, just told her to keep calm and help us fix this. We managed to undo 30% of the damage done. The rest was lost for good. Our company were sued for $21 million for deleting valuable patent papers, multi-million-dollar contract deals, etc. Luckily, our boss knew their boss privately and managed to work something out. I quit shortly after that. Story 55. A month into my new job, I gave the GM's personal number to a customer, his cell phone number. Right after I did it, I had a panic attack. The customer had bullied me for it, leaning over my desk and threatening me while his wife distracted other customers. So they wouldn't see this 40-something man intimidating a 20-something receptionist. He did call the GM's phone. I got lucky because he bragged about how he had gotten the number from me. The GM flipped his crap and told the guy never to come back. He sat down with me for my side of the story later that week and told me what to do if something similar occurred. I'm still here 5 years later, but that will always stick with me. Thank God for my coworkers. One of the financial planners actually found the customer's number and reamed him out for his behavior. She was amazing. But yeah, don't give out the GM's cell phone number. Story 56. He dropped a 15-ton mold from a crane. Damn thing probably fell 20 feet. He was specifically told not to lift anything with the crane, and he decided to do so anyway. Crane was rated to 10 tons, and one of the cables broke. Put a big-ass crater in the concrete floor and cost the company about $175,000 for the new mold, and probably another big chunk of change to have the floor repaired, and new cables and an overhaul for the crane. Caused the facility we provided the part for to be shut down for about 18 hours at a cost of $1,000 per minute. Total cost to unduct the situation was a little more than $1 million. The Asians I worked for pretty much ran at him with a substances test. He failed it. The last time I saw him was about a week after it happened, sitting in front of his house crying. True story. Story 57. Call center. We were all basically new as the place had opened within the past 6 months. He'd just started. Being such a new place, pretty much everyone knew everyone by name. It wasn't difficult. There were maybe 100 of us. So one day, new guy, me, and a few others were outside in the smoke area talking. For whatever reason, guy starts talking about why he was fired from his last job, credit card theft. We were all glancing at him like he was the world's biggest idiot, and glancing over at the call center manager and his assistant, who were suddenly very tuned into our conversation. We all went inside. New guy stayed outside. Management also came inside. Within the hour, he was gone. He never made it back to the phone. Story 58. Someone put Jetta in a piston engine plane, took off, lost all 4 people on board and 2 on the ground. He, I think, went to jail for manslaughter. I should ask my boss for the NTSB report number. I know he said it was a heck take. A few weeks after that happened, with everyone reviewing files and training, etc. Story 59. The new guy at my work ran a plate of regular pasta to a woman that had celiac disease and had ordered it gluten-free. She ate a decent amount of the pasta before her server saw what she was eating and snatched it off the table. The woman was understandably upset, and after talking to the manager for about 20 minutes, her stomach had swollen like 2 times its normal size. Dude wasn't fired even though we go through an extensive 2-week training before being put on the floor on our own. He was later fired for falling asleep in the middle of taking an order at table. Story 60. On a Friday, Christmas Eve, probably 15 years ago, all of us employees were off because it was a holiday. New accounting lady, first time entering, direct deposit payroll, entered info incorrectly. Payday comes, and everyone in the whole company had their paycheck withdrawn from their account instead of deposited. Late morning and people are out Christmas shopping and cards are being declined and people's accounts are all jacked up. My auto insurance bounced. Luckily, my shopping was already done. The owner of the company called each employee, 20 or so people, and offered to give us cash to get us through until Monday if we needed it. They ended up paying each employee's NSF or any other fees. Accounting lady cried non-stop from that Friday through that Monday when she could fix everyone's account. My bank said it was actually some sort of illegal activity by the employer, and I could make a police report, but we were all close, and I didn't want to go there. Story 61. This was someone in the same training group that I started the job with. I cruised through the training and, in my spare time, wrote a quick batch file to open up the most used programs at the start of the day. Then, feeling nice, I sent this out to the people in my training group. This particular guy somehow managed to open up hundreds of instances of each program and link in the batch file because he claimed he didn't know where it was all going, straight to the taskbar, and kept running the batch file over and over and over. He ended up sitting at his computer doing nothing but running my batch file repeatedly for 2 hours, not taking any calls until one of the supervisors went over to check on him. This is a tech support job, and yes, he is no longer here. Story 62. They forgot to tighten the lug nuts for one of the customer's wheels. He only spun them on by hand. The customer got about a mile away and the wheel fell off. He came back with the police who had given him a ride. Part of my job description is performing damage control, but this time, there was pretty much nothing I could do to calm him down. In the end, the shop paid for all his repairs and a new set of tires and wheels. Nearly $5,000 lost due to a stupid mistake. Pro tip, never hand tighten anything. If you're down there long enough to spin the nut on by hand, you're down there long enough to torque it down to specifications too. Spinning on a nut by hand is only meant for the first few turns, just to ensure the nut is threaded properly. Story 63. A story passed down to me. They're about to start the tour of the big, expensive facility, and then an emergency shutdown of the big, fancy laser occurs. What the heck? Maybe they finally locked somebody inside the chamber. This hasn't happened to date, by the way. Tour guide is just about to apologize to the group about it, as the last guy comes ambling in. Something like this occurs. "Oh, you made it. Yeah, sorry. I was on the other side of the building. Sorry, I'm late. Wait, how did you get here? Through the double doors? The emergency doors? No, the ones where you just press on the door for 5 seconds and it'll open. It says so on the door." He had caused the emergency shutdown because the doors to inside the laser didn't look like emergency doors to him. $1 million experiments were delayed or canceled because of this. Story 64. I used to work as a rent-a-cop. One of our clients was an ironworks. They made big auger equipment for sand and gravel quarries. A lot of their parts had to be custom cast, so they have a forge with 2 big-ass crucibles full of molten steel. These crucibles cannot ever go off, because if the steel were to cool, it couldn't be remelted. One of the jobs of the night and weekend guards was to check the smelters every half hour to make sure they were still working. A few years before I worked there, someone decided nothing was going to happen, so they slept through the shift. One of the crucibles went off and the steel cooled inside it. They had to completely disassemble the smelter and remove the 7.5-ton ingot of worthless steel at the cost of several $100,000. Story 65. He was caught snorting substances in the toilets and was immediately dismissed. Now you'd think it would end there, but he was accepted for a job elsewhere, and once they received a reference from our place, he got sacked. So he went home and grabbed his dad's sledgehammer and hopped on a bus to our workplace. He caved in several of the downstairs windows, then got on a bus to leave. The bus was stuck in rush hour traffic, and he was apprehended by the police just a few hundred yards from those broken windows a few minutes later. It was an amusing day. Story 66. I'm a valet. This kid I worked with hit one of the support pillars in the garage with the side of a car, SCD the entire side, flattened the fender, and ripped the tire apart. This was during an overnight shift, and instead of notifying someone, he just parked it in the garage and went about his business. He actually ended up getting fired for going up to a guest's room to fool around while on the clock. But yeah, he ducked that car up real good. Something like $20,000 in damages to a brand new Jeep Compass. Story 67. A guy came into our office to configure a MacBook. He wasn't a Mac specialist. He also didn't know how Dropbox worked. He deleted the Dropbox folders from this Mac and from all the other computers linked to it. He deleted all our agency's files, several gigs of them. We were nervous for a couple of hours. Clients were nervous. Our boss called his boss. Another time, the same guy was waiting for an email confirmation about the importance of files on a computer. Didn't receive the email. Assumed that the files weren't important. Deleted a month's worth of web design without backing up. I'm amazed this guy is still working at that company. Story 68. Good friend was working for a company as a summer intern, with the understanding that if he did a good job, he would get hired at the end of the summer. At the end of the summer party at the CEO's fancy house on the lake, he accidentally ran the CEO's jet ski into a dock and almost died. He didn't know that jet skis don't have brakes until it was too late. He had never been on a jet ski before. The only thing that saved him was the life jacket provided cushioning. Someone had to fish him out of the water before he drowned as the crash knocked him out. Totaled the jet ski. Did not get job offer at end of internship. Story 69. There is something uplifting about this thread. I always hear stories from people who made tons of money for their companies and didn't see a dime of it. It's nice to think that for every person with $1 million contribution, there is another guy with $1 million duck up. Dunno why. Story 70. Working for a very large, well-known tech company. We had a new guy show up who was extremely eager to get along with everyone. About 5 of us were standing around, just bullcrafting about how long the shift was going, with one of them saying he needs a new chair to relax. The new guy overheard this and felt like helping the guy out. He goes through Outlook and finds the CEO, worldwide company of 100,000 employees, and with no hesitation, types up a well-thought-out email concerning the fact that he needs a new chair for someone. It only took an hour to get a reply and an invitation to a conference meeting with 3 layers of management. Story 71. We got a new delivery boy at work who had just moved from South America and spoke very little English. This wasn't a huge problem since almost everyone spoke fluent Spanish. So we sent him out on his first delivery, which was paid ahead of time by credit card. We gave him this order on purpose since it only required a signature, and he wouldn't need to count out change. He comes back 15 minutes later and says that everything was fine and that the customer even met him outside. 10 minutes later, we get a call from the customer saying their order still wasn't there. He had apparently given the food to some random person walking down the street. Story 72. Had to terminate a new employee's second day on the job for backing out one of our maintenance trucks. He didn't close the open passenger door that was left wide open, and it got caught on one of the concrete security pillars, the ones you see in parking lots. His actions bent the door back past 120 degrees out. The git attempted to drive forward as if nothing happened, like when you hit your tire on a curb or something. Several of our employees had to flag him down halfway down the parking lot because he wouldn't stop. "Oh, my bad," was all he said. We started mandatory substances testing for all new employees after that. Story 73, oh, that one. Guy at my job, software development company, deployed a test software that had clearly on the beginning of every file of code, "Do not boot onto prod, into production," and booted it up. The result? The entire company mailing system went down due to an internal spam DDoS, because nearly 1 billion emails with the lyrics of Metallica's Master of Puppets were sent to every single mailbox and topped every hard drive of the server with it. He said that he did it because he wanted to see why it wouldn't work on the prod server. CEO wasn't happy. Someone was shouted at by the entire team and fired at the end of the day. Story 74. Wanted to charge his iPhone, so he plugged it into a computer that was secured and not meant to have anything connected to it, ever. Mistake on so many levels. Security took his phone and kept it for 6 months while it was forensically examined. During this entire time, he kept paying the bill for a phone he didn't actually have. Eventually, it was returned to him, and he was upset that all of the data on the phone had been wiped. Story 75. A young woman who was hired for our summer programming idly sat by as a child fell and broke his wrist. She told him to suck it up and never bothered to report it to any of us. He left shortly after and returned the next day with a full cast and a livid father. Another gal lost a game of Sorry with some kids, went "duck this," and proceeded to go cry in the bathroom for half an hour. Story 76. A single guy I worked with at a propane company shows up at a customer's home with a work order to disconnect the gas service for several months non-payment. The homeowner, a recently single smoking hot mother of 2 young kids, knew he was coming and met him at the door in very revealing lingerie. She invited him inside to discuss the details. Long story short, he's got himself a booty call for several months, and she gets through the cold winter without paying the gas bill. We never let him live down the fact that he was paying to heat 2 houses that winter. Story 77. Teacher here. She showed a movie of Othello without previewing it. It was basically soft-core film because she had promised the kids a movie and didn't have other plans. She kept showing it through the rest of the day. Ended up being investigated by the ethics committee. They let her finish out the year since it was only a few weeks away, and then did not renew her contract. Story 78. Night attendant on his very first night on the job helped a paranoid schizophrenic completely dismantle the air conditioner unit because he had found a hidden video camera recording him, but accidentally pushed it further into the unit when investigating. The man was fully aware that the client was an actively delusional paranoid schizophrenic who was being transitioned to 24-hour observation because of refusing his meds, and yet he somehow fully accepted at face value that there was a hidden camera in the air conditional. Story 79. Working retail, there's the register and the floor, sales floor. New girl comes in. Frilly foofy wannabe Kim K type. New girl was getting training behind the register with my manager. My manager then says, "All right, time for some sales. Why don't you get on the floor?" New girl literally looked down at the floor, gave her a dirty look, and asked if she was serious. She then proceeded to say in a jitey tone how dirty the floor was and that she's not getting on it. My manager just looked at her, flabbergasted. Story 80. Builder removed an old gas fireplace from an old couple's house. Didn't cap the gas pipe properly and just sort of bent it over by hitting it with his hammer a few times. Think I'm a builder, not a gas man. Gas leaked out the pipe over time. House went boom. Old couple pass. As far as I know from the stories I get told, he got done with manslaughter. And these days, everyone in the company is strictly forbidden from touching anything to do with gas. Even removing a gas cooker will get your contract terminated. Story 81. A nurse at my work had just graduated from nursing school less than a month before and started brand new career. She got rooms 247 and 245 confused. One lady got a really small dose of her usual pain medication, fine, whatever. The guy in the next room for a dose 10 times what he was supposed to. Story 82. An intern engineer got caught forging a signature on quality document. He didn't want to walk to another building to find the woman he needed to sign it. Yeah, turns out she was out on maternity leave. And then a principal design engineer sent out a final revision of a major design document. The intern then redlined the document and sent it back, covered in corrections. How he felt in his vast experience of 2 months, the document should have been constructed. He got fired pretty quickly. Story 83. I work with low-functioning, highly aggressive teen boys. A staff who's not new enough for this to be forgivable was asked to supervise one of the boys. While I took a call, she decided to ignore him while she texted. This boy smeared feces on himself, his floor, and his walls, then all the way down the hall. He then crap in the sink. She managed to miss it completely. Then she said she couldn't help clean because it was too gross. Story 84. So a new hire finds out I've only been there for a few months. So on Monday, a week after he started, He asked me how much longer until the substances test is usually scheduled, because he wants get wrecked at a party this weekend, in front of the manager's office with an open door, and the manager talking with the HR rep who conducted his interview and handles our department. Suffice it to say, he was good to go and get wrecked at the party. Story 85. One of the things the night shift has to do is shred all the papers in the shred boxes. The new girl shredded everything in our boss's inbox. To be fair, it wasn't marked at all, and the inboxes looked just like the shred boxes. Story 86. New girl where I work, retail, started freeloading within 2 months of being there. She hadn't even passed the 3-month probation yet. In case anyone doesn't know, freeloading is putting items in a customer's bag and intentionally not scanning them so they get them for free. Apparently, she started doing it for family, then for friends, and then acquaintances, obviously thinking we couldn't track it. Sure turned around quick when the cops escorted her out one day. Story 87. A week in, he pre-called in sick, said he thought he was getting the flu and that he needed the next 2 days off. My boss fired him on the spot. His mom called an hour later demanding answers. Apparently, he lied to her as to why he was fired. Now he's fired and grounded. Story 88. From the SO. Guy started at 8 a.m., went to HR to complete some paperwork, and spent most of his time trying to stare down the HR manager's blouse. 2 hours later, he told one of the executive secretaries that they should have a wet t-shirt contest at work because they'd win. Needless to say, he was out of there by noon. Story 89. A guy went to training to be a bank teller. They learned how to open up family trusts. The trainer had them out, Michael Jordan, as an example for the beneficiary. It wasn't until 6 months later, after a customer noticed that he had entered Michael Jordan as one of the beneficiaries for every trust he opened. Story 90. I worked at a craft store that offered custom framing, and a guy walked to the back where the framing counter is, grabbed 3 framed items that were displays, and walked by the register where a new seasonal hire was. He just said, "Picking up my framing," like as he walked by, and she waved him out with a, "Have a nice day." Turns out he stole over $500 worth of art and materials. She wasn't there much longer. Story 91. Newitt staffer was setting up their own desktop PC, found some unrecognized files on the hard drive, and started deleting them, all of them. There were a lot of them. Took a long time. Oops, those weren't local files. That was the complete contents of the file server. How was an It Professional supposed to tell the difference between local and network drives? Story 92. I forwarded an Outlook meeting invite to a new colleague. He replied with, "I'm not sure why I wasn't included on this in the first place. Tom's fat A must be smoking too much pot." Tom was our client and the meeting originator. Not only were my colleague's comments extremely unprofessional, replies to forwarded meeting invites go back to the originator of the meeting. Tom was our client. Emphasis on was. Story 93. The new guy asked if he could start the following Monday instead of on a Wednesday, and then called in sick on his first day of work off because he needed a day to reset after the weekend. He was given another chance, and after calling in sick an average of 2 days off each week and showing up late constantly, he was let go. This was last week. Story 94. At the U.S. Mint, stamped 1 million quarters off beam. Off beam means that the head side and tail side line up when the quarters is flipped over end to end. This particular batch of quarters had the tail side turned 90 degrees to the right of the head side. 1 million quarters was basically one full shift run. Off beam means every quarter was worthless and had to be reminted. Story 95. I work in the inpatient behavioral health unit of a hospital, psych ward. A coworker of mine started dating a recently discharged patient, which is dumb. Then she posted about it on Facebook, where she is friends with a lot of our coworkers, which is really dumb. Story 96. This guy at my office brought his pet goldfish to work, and one of the brokers apparently ate it after a disagreement they had with the intern. Ever since, my HR director has banned pets for a more productive atmosphere. Story 97. A friend of mine was working in a mechanics repair shop when he was told to order 1,000 of a certain item. He obliged, and then a few days later, a lorry dropped by 1 million of the item. Turns out they came in bags of 1,000 and he didn't know, so ordered 1,000 bags of 1,000. Understandable but unforgivable mistake. Left soon after. Story 98. A new girl at my job told everyone about how she doesn't believe in the moon, as in she thinks the moon is a huge picture attached to a satellite put there by the government. Needless to say, everyone always makes fun of her. Story 99. Some idiot walked 2 feet past a running jet engine on a 737. Thank God he was gigantic and that the engine wasn't powered up. I genuinely still think about it all the time 3 years later. I was the one right there yelling at him to stop. I would have seen him from front and center go right in. Story 100. We hired a projectionist in 2006. He threaded The Hills Have Eyes instead of Ice Age. The meltdown. Needless to say, the brutal scene at the very beginning didn't impress the kids or their parents. Story 101. The CEO decided to call the bluff of a client. It wasn't a bluff. They took their $15 million of business and walked away. That was about 65 to 70% of the company's overall business. Idiot. Story 102. They thought the point of a bouncer was to choke out anyone that got mouthy, even after extensive treat everyone with respect training. Put a dentist to sleep in 7 seconds after he disputed the cost of a lap dance. Source. Former penthouse manager. Story 103. He labeled a medication Thorazine instead of hydrochlorothiazide. The patient died, and the hospital was sued. This was 3 years ago, and the litigation is still ongoing. Story 104. I work in film and TV. Was on a commercial shoot, and against my recommendations, all of the hard drives were sent with one person. She left them in her car in front of her apartment, and they were all stolen. $10,000 mistake. Story 105. More bad decisions than mistake. He, a plasterer, got drunk on the job, got other members of the construction crew drunk, and then started a brawl with them. I fired a total of 5 people that day. Story 106. The occupational therapist at the school I used to work at used to try to make photocopies off of his iPad. End result, pages and pages of him trying to adjust the gradient to make the copies come out. Story 107. Not me, but my chemistry professor said that when he managed a chemical plant, an intern was instructed to add 15 grams of platinum catalyst to a reaction vessel. The intern instead added 15 ounces of platinum to the reaction vessel. Story 108. Security guard decided to play quick draw in the mirrored elevator. Shot a hole right through the door. He handed his gun over to the night desk operator and just sat there deaf until his shift ended. Story 109. A guy was spraying insecticide in a house for fleas. The old woman came running up to him and said, "I don't want fleas, spray me." And he did. Pretty soon her skin started burning. Story 110. She told my materialistic boss that her hair extensions were fake-looking and that her $7,000 purse was ugly. I wish I had the balls to say it myself. Story 111. Didn't check the aircraft type before assigning a speed. Told an F-16 to maintain best forward speed, which caused a sonic boom over a major metropolitan area. Story 112. Somebody left a wrench inside of a satellite. The next time, said satellite was moved. The wrench gets sex around inside for a bit. Everything has to be inspected when something like that happens. Story 113. Came in on their first day of work, a couple minutes late with a coffee from Tim Horton. The job was at a coffee shop that was a competitor to Tim. Story 114. I'm a host at a restaurant, and on my first week, on our busiest day, I lost someone's credit card. Was probably the worst thing I've ever done. Somehow, still work there. Story 115. I work for a national floral supplier. Every time someone forgets to change a semi-trailer's temperature to 38 degrees, we lose $100,000 worth of product. This happens several times per year. What is the worst mistake you've seen someone make at work? Story 1. In the Army, I was assigned to a field artillery unit. During a training exercise, a gunner in our unit didn't align his tick marks up with the collimator correctly, and his tank ended up shooting a dummy round into a formation of soldiers, hit 4 or 5. If it were a live round, the whole unit would have been decimated. Dude got 15 years or more in Leavenworth. Story 2. Mine is, a friend of mine is an intern medical resident. There was a patient in her hospital that a whole team of doctors had just convinced the family to remove from life support after weeks. My friend went into the room after reading the wrong patient's chart and told the family she expected the patient to make a full recovery. It was everything that the family had been praying to hear for months, only to find out it wasn't true. Story 3. Back in the dark ages, I worked for a small-town daily newspaper. There was one large discount store that refused to advertise with us and would only use the other paper in town, our sole rival, which was more of a weekly shopper type paper. For unknown reason, store decided to give our paper a chance. Ad ran, and there in the double truck, full color ad, was men's shirts $10, minus the ever-important R in shirts. Yep, men's craps. Needless to say, they stuck with the other paper. Story 4. When I was a teen, I worked at a full-service gas station. One day, a guy came in towing a boat to get gas. A guy a couple years younger was working and thought the owner had taken the gas cap off of the boat. He placed the gas nozzle in a fishing rod holder. It is basically a hole in the top of the side of the boat. He proceeded to pump about $40 worth of gas onto the floor of the boat. The owner was understandably upset. Story 5. I actually just barely prevented this from happening. An undergrad was working in the genetic research lab I'm doing my PhD in. Keeping things clean and eliminating contamination are pretty high priority in our lab. Different people will use different chemicals. Ethanol, hydrochloric acid, or bleach are the most common. The undergrad decided he was going to rinse some bottles in bleach before placing them in the hydrochloric acid bath to make them extra clean, creating chlorine gas in the process. I stopped him right before he turned our lab into a scene from World War I. Story 6. My family started a recycling business. It was a somewhat large business. My grandparents, aunts and uncles, parents and cousins were all involved. About a week after it had opened, my aunt bought around 50 tons of newspaper. She hadn't checked the prices, they changed quite often, and bought it about 50% higher price than what it was selling. It almost caused the business to fail. My grandfather was angrier than I had ever seen him. Story 7. I work in the television broadcasting industry, and I work with people who have ejected, rewound a tape that was live on air. This was many years ago. Aired the wrong show. Not the wrong episode, but the wrong show. Aired a different channel's content. It's all satellites, and we get them all on the router. Crap happens. No one died or was fired. Story 8. Working in an online gambling chat room. Dude comes to take me off my break and comes in the room. At that point, a player had told us his brother passed, so I said, "Oh no!" Dude taking my place sees this and gives a big, "Oh yeah," Kool-Aid guy style. Story 9. Not wearing his seatbelt while driving down a loading dock on a fork truck. I held his hand after he was penned down under it until the paramedics arrived. He didn't make it. I still feel like I should have been able to help. It's all I can do not to cry when I see his kids around mine. Story 10. Work in manufacturing. Some guy programmed the CNC machine, and the machine that checks them should be done by separate people. Well, he made an error on both. Therefore, it was machined with an error, and then checked as if the error was right. Scrapped a full engine set of turbine blades 200,000 pounds. He got a written warning. Story 11. I practice as an architect in the UK. I was working on a job which was a refurbish of a listed hotel. The problem was that this hotel had had a fire and then sat open to the elements for 5 years before the refurbishment work began. Obviously, the entire interior basically had to be stripped. My firm was hired to do design and specification work, but no on-site inspection or design for the demolition and slapping works. If we had been hired, we most certainly would have been able to stop the accident. The workmen on site decided to speed up the demolition work. They would bring a small digger up the old hotel lift to the 4th floor and begin the demolition work there. The entire interior of the building collapsed. 3 people passed, and several others were seriously maimed and injured. I take health and safety way more seriously than most of my colleagues, but it's because I know how stupid mistakes and oversight can lead to people's deaths. Story 12. I worked in a busy pizzeria when I was young. The pizza maker was talking to his girlfriend who was standing in front of him on the other side of the counter. He throws up the pizza dough in the air to spin it, and it comes down and lands on top of his girlfriend's head and continues to spin. The packed dining room erupted in laughter, and she ran out crying with flour all over her face and jet black hair. Story 13. I work in library cataloging services, and our lead deleted all of the customer's information from our database. She's still the lead, believe it or not. Story 14. Back dock at the Safeway. I used to work was broken. Instead of the thing you pull to attach the ramp to the truck, you would reach your hand down and pull the lever, which was kind of stuck down. That would only half put it in place. You would then need to manually attach the joiny bit and move your fingers at the last second to have out a few hundred key of metal attach to a truck with your fingers as lube. All the managers knew, but has always acted like a multi-billion-dollar company, was their money good guy truck driver one day refused to dock until he saw a work order for it, saying the loss of goods would be greater than the repair cost. Fixed overnight. Amazing what happens when a middle-aged man rocks up instead of clueless cannon fodder teenagers. Story 15. A well-liked director of our art department was leaving for another company. He crafted a beautiful and inspiring message which announced his departure, how much he'd enjoyed working with us, and how he was now onto a new adventure. He sent the message to the entire company. One of his junior employees accidentally replied, all how her life was devastated. She was heartbroken, and she was going to be despondent over losing the best lover she'd ever had. He was married, not to her, and had 3 children. The Bon Voyage celebration was quietly canceled. He left silently, 10 minutes after the reply had been sent. Without understanding the mail system, she tried to do a recall all and sent a, "Please don't read the message this is attached to." It was a private message between colleagues. Hoo boy, that was an interesting day. Story 16. Watched my coworker cover himself in crap. He improperly operated the waste pump out equipment at a marina I worked at. The nozzle came off the boat and forcefully sprayed him in the face with several gallons of weeks-old human feces. This is also midsummer in Florida, and he had his mouth open. Story 17. I was a trainee dental nurse for a year, and about 4 months in, we had one patient come in for a pretty standard procedure. Looking at her chart, she had a history of heart problems, and the anesthetic the dentist gave her contained adrenaline. This stuck out to me as weird, but I was 4 months in and she was 10 years into being a dentist, so I kept my mouth shut. Patient went into cardiac arrest on the table after being given the anesthetic. Got wheeled out by paramedics after I called an ambulance. Turns out she shouldn't have been given adrenaline, and the dentist just didn't check her medical history properly for whatever reason. That practice got shut down a couple of years later, and I still feel guilty every time I think about it for not saying something. She was okay afterwards, but it was very scary. Story 18. Back when I used to work at McDonald's, I witnessed a few noteworthy incidents. I spent most of my shifts as a cashier, so if there was a mistake with the order or with the food, I was the first one to hear about it. Well, one day I had a customer come up to me and hold out his half-eaten hamburger. I asked him if there was a problem with it, and without a word, he lifted up the bun to reveal a half-eaten sticker stuck to the patty. Not necessarily the worst mistake I've seen in a workplace, but definitely the weirdest. Story 19. I saw a girl who had just been hired drop the water bottle when trying to put it on the cooler, and it rolled across the office, glugging out water the whole way. By the time someone stopped it, 90% of the water was on the floor, evenly spread through everybody's work area. Story 20. We had a woman at our work who was hired as a maternity leave replacement. She accidentally deleted the entire Google Drive. It collectively holds all the company price lists, marketing materials, sales and customer service training guides, passwords, logins, and procedures. It is updated in real time. Anyone accesses it. The worst is that she deleted it, realized and restored a new version. It took them 3 weeks to realize that no one's work was syncing to the drive. We lost 3 weeks worth of work. She actually tried to deny what she did, but everything is recorded somewhere, and it took 2 Google techs coming out to work out what happened. She got fired for her adamant denial. I should say that it took them that long to realize that the things everyone was adding and changing to their own drive weren't syncing with the shared version of the drive. We use NetSuite as our main platform, so lucky orders and a lot of scripting weren't lost. Safe to say it was a royal duck-up, and she made it 100 times worse than it had to be. We did have tech come out to try and sort. Google offices are about 2 suburbs away, and I think one of the bosses knows people there. Story 21. My brother, who works at JP Morgan and Chase as an investment banker, told me once that his work colleague who was assisting a powerful person in a lucrative deal accidentally caused them to lose 14 million pounds. Soon as he realized the magnitude of his mess, he started to break everything in his office and started shouting that he was going to commit died. Story 22. I saw someone violating the Fair Housing Act. It took a few weeks to notice, but I eventually realized that she flat out would not take a mail out on a tour of the apartment complex. When I asked her about it, she said she didn't feel safe with them. I don't think she stayed much longer. That could have been a $100,000 mistake for her if she did it to the wrong person. Story 23. Pushed a corrupt Windows image to every PC on the domain using System Center. Erased the whole university, including the System Center server itself. Recovery was a labor-intensive process. I didn't see the guy doing it, but I saw all the PCs suddenly start formatting themselves. Story 24. Boss kept his fully restored classic vehicle, purposefully trying to stay vague for reason, in the warehouse. His business, his space, his call. So, every morning the warehouse guy needs to back it out and put it in the parking lot for the day so work can be done. Cue the new warehouse guy, not really good for much first day. No training and all. Hey, N0B, go back out Bossman's car and put it in the parking lot. You can drive stick, right? Oh, sure. N0B plows the boss's vehicle right into the side of the neighboring business boss's brand new GMC Yukon. Still had the paper tag on it from the dealership. Dude didn't even make it until lunch. Story 25. I was a temp worker in a factory. We would fill boxes of stuff, put those boxes into bigger boxes, stack the boxes onto pallets, and take them to the giant wrapping machine that spun around the pallet to wrap it in saran wrap or cellophane, whatever. One guy took his crafty broken skid full off improperly stacked boxes onto the platform for wrapping and had his other 2 skids nearby. The machine starts and immediately hits one of his pallets, knocking over a bunch of boxes, spilling crap everywhere. The main pallet in the middle isn't stacked well, so the cellophane just knocks all the boxes over. He's at the 3rd pallet with the powered pallet jack under it. He reverses to get it out of the danger zone, but accelerates too quick, and the entire stack falls over. The machine is still spinning and knocking crap over. He's trying to stop his pallet jack, and everyone stops working to look at this. Ducking Bozo and everyone lets out a groan because we're all going to have to clean and fix his duckfest without his help before work can continue. Can't keep filling boxes to box and stack them if we can't wrap them and get them out of the way. He can't help because he's super fired. Story 26. A coworker friendly asked my salary, I told him. I was making about 4 times more than him, and he was in a higher hierarchy. Hell was set loose. We were both fired by the end of the week. Story 27. a brand new hospital was built, and they brought all the really expensive hospital beds by to start filling the rooms. You know, the kind that can roll in and out of all the rooms when the patient has to go to x-ray or whatever. Well, they didn't build the doors of the rooms wide enough to accommodate the bed, resulting in a long delay on opening the hospital while the doors were torn out and fixed. Story 28. Part with late-stage Alzheimer's had been progressively getting sicker. Used to be a walker, wanderer, eventually just got a bit sicker each day and bedbound. Everyone kept giving his meds like normal. Ate less, tummy became distended. He was found unresponsive in his bed, apparently vomited, and died. The nurse's aides were in charge of cleaning him up. One went to clean the strange vomit that came out of his nose. She wiped it with her gloved hand. It was crap. He had crap coming out of his nose. He apparently had a bowel obstruction, and it got so bad to the point that everything backed up and he was vomiting up his own undigested food and fecal matter. A simple monitoring of his distended stomach would have revealed that. A simple charting of his last bowel movement would have revealed that. Nobody could find when his last bowel movement was, and the charting that should have been done apparently hadn't been done in months. It could have been caught. He didn't have to die that way. All those little negligent mistakes eventually lead up to one gigantic mistake. Story 29. A mold setter forgot to demagnetize the injection molding press clamp and tried to pull the 30,000 pounds mold from the press. The crane basically tried to lift a machine the size of my house off the ground. When the D-ring broke, the crane bounced off its tracks. I was able to feel the ground shake from 1,000 feet away. Story 30. ATC here. You'd hope I would not have anything to say in threads like this. I was under training, and the guy training me gave the runway to the VFR controller for landing an aircraft when he still had workers on the runway. The way it works is, the ground controller owns surfaces, such as taxiways or runway, for use with ground vehicles and taxiing aircraft. He then removes them from these surfaces for landing and takeoff of aircraft, and gives the surface to the other controller dealing with landings and takeoffs. You are expected to do a visual sweep of your surface prior to handoff, and upon receipt, this was done. But the workers were off to the side of the runway, working on something at the time. As the aircraft is given his landing instruction, they notice a vehicle crossing the runway and call a missed approach and go around. The VFR controller, baffled, asks what the duck the workers were doing there. The ground controller thought he gave them a restriction to remain off and away from the runway, but he hadn't. His control license was pulled. I have a few more stories, but this one's the biggest close call I've seen. Story 31. Back in college, I worked as a tire and oil change technician. One day I was working on a 05 to 07 Subaru Outback or Forester, I think. It was getting 4 new tires and an oil change. Now, typically when we change a set of tires, we also replace the valve stem, so most of us would typically use pliers and rip out the old valve stem to quickly deflate the tire. The only time you couldn't do this was when they had pressure sensors built in. Those were solid and metal though, and we would have to take the slow route and remove the core from the valve stem to not damage it. This Subaru had black rubber valve stems, so I started ripping them out. They were tougher than usual, but I managed to rip out 3 before I realized they were pressure sensors. Crap. Turns out some of the new, at the time, Subarus had special sensors made to look like standard black rubber valve stems. We ended up having to replace all 4, which wasn't cheap. Well, duck. So then I start to do the oil change. I raise the car all the way up and quickly locate the drain plug for the oil. I quickly drain out all the oil and replace the filter, which, thankfully, is right next to the drain plug. Super easy. I lower the car back down and put 5 quarts of oil in it. Check the oil level, and it's sky high, way up on the dipstick. At that point, I realized I had not drained the oil. I had drained the transmission fluid. Turns out, the transmission drain plug and engine drain plug are close together and look similar. Who knew? Crap. Another tech had to run a full transmission fluid service on it after that, and the filter had to be delivered from a nearby parts store. I took a lunch break after that, pretty pissed at myself. Thankfully, the customer was pretty understanding about the whole thing, and of course, the shop paid for everything. They remained a regular customer there as well. I changed the oil many more times on that same Subaru, and I never made that mistake again. Story 32. In a machine shop. Watch the apprentice set up to make a relatively simple part. I don't remember the exact dimensions of the part, but it was no longer than 4 or 5 inches. I believe about 10 pieces were required. Apprentice goes to material rack to pull the required material. Simple, mild steel or cold-rolled steel for the American. The only available lengths were about 6 to 8 feet in length. Apprentice takes the material to the lathe and slides it through the headstock and through the chuck with enough sticking out to make the piece tightens chuck and starts to set up the cutting tool. As I look over, I notice about 5 feet or more of material hanging out of the headstock. I'm thinking to myself, what is he doing? Can't remember exactly what I was doing at the time, but the job was almost complete, so I figured I'd go over and see when it's done. In the meantime, the apprentice is figuring out the required spindle speed for the material. With the material being about 16 millimeter diameter, around 3 of an inch, the apprentice figured a high speed was necessary to machine the piece. I heard the lathe turn on and whiz up to speed. I'm guessing around 1600 to 2000 RPMs. I looked up to see the material hanging out from the tailstock, rotating and wobbling in a spiral cone kind of formation. Not good. By the time I could even open my mouth to tell him to shut the machine off, the material bent at a 90-degree angle at the headstock. The only way I can describe what this looks and sounds like? Think of a blade on a helicopter rotor, but the helicopter's flying sideways, about to crash, and said blade is hitting the floor. Within seconds, the concrete floor is being chipped away with chunks of concrete flying all over the place. The apprentice just crouches and covers his body with his arms, and his hands are covering his head. I run halfway through the shop to hit the emergency stop. I start laughing and tell apprentice to go to the toilet, bathroom, to change his trousers, pants. Story 33. My father's best friend and a coworker were cleaning a big oven. Apparently there was argon gas in the oven. One of them fell down because he couldn't breathe, and my father's best friend just jumped in to try to help him. They both passed. Story 34. A guy sent in documents to A, prove his dad had died and get his driving license canceled because of it, and B, have his own license changed to include the title he inherited on his dad's death. Unfortunately, he and his dad had the same name, and then, obviously, the same title. Cue him calling a month later to see if there was something wrong with his license, only for me to access his record and find out he was pass. Whatever get processed, the application didn't bother looking at any of the dates on this guy's paperwork, and just canceled his license. That and the person who put a pot noodle, with the foil lid still attached, in a microwave and evacuated the building. Story 35. Paralyzed somebody so they needed to spend the rest of their life eating through a feeding tube. I work at a surgery clinic. I should note this was not done by any of the providers at the clinic. It was done by a surgeon in Mexico, and the patient later presented to the clinic I work at. Story 36. I worked at a Costco for a year and a half, and they like to move certain items from one side of the store to another, or just offset any item. Well, someone had the bright idea to move glass jars of garlic from the floor to the first level platform, basically a higher shelf. Now Costco sells things in bulk, and their motto is bigger is better. So these are large jars. Naturally, someone dropped one in the smell. Dear God, the overwhelming smell. Story 37 that I can talk about. The worst was probably the head of the equities desk. In order to match up with some expiring futures contracts, they had to sell differing amounts of 200 separate stocks in the share market's opening auction. Didn't matter what price, because as long as they sold all of them, they'd exactly match the price of the expiring futures. By definition, if prices went up, they'd lose on the futures, but make money on the stock sale and vice versa if prices dropped. The whole team entered the sales into their terminals as usual and waited for the open. And with 2 seconds to go before the order matching process, the head of the desk accidentally deleted the orders, all of them. The orders were big enough that when they were canceled, the market price spiked upward. Then, they had to enter sell orders into a live market with moving prices that were big enough to push down the prices of the individual stocks. It took them almost 10 minutes to sell all of the stocks that they had to get rid of. In all, with losing money on the futures price spiking up and losing money by the sales forcing share prices down, they lost about $9 million. They also had to face an investigation by the market regulator for price manipulation. All of this happened 3 days before the end of the quarter and completely wiped out the team's bonus pool. Story 38. I worked at a dental manufacturer. While in training, a fellow trainee decided the hot wax boiler was too hot and took the high-pressure air hose and blew it directly into the boiling wax. Wax sprayed her face, her arms, and her legs. She was severely burned and had to be rushed to the hospital. After that, every workspace had a warning telling us not to try to cool the boiling wax, and trainees were not allowed to cool their molds with the high-pressure air hose. Story 39. Fellow cast member at Disneyland got himself fired by capsizing one of the Mike Fink keelboats with a full load of unsuspecting guests. It capsized due to his errors, overloading the boat which made it top-heavy, then fishtailing the rudder a little too vigorously at speed to simulate rapids. Kids, adults, grandparents, the lot of them. I'm shocked there were no real injuries sustained. Everyone had to swim to the safety of Tom Sawyer's Island. I was there to assist the soaking wet and angry guests over to the raft dock and back to the mainland. And that's why we no longer have the keelboats attraction. Story 40. I worked in a biochemistry lab that extracted a protein from animal tissue for study. We stored samples in a fridge in the lab, and one night, the fridge failed. My boss was cleaning it out while I worked at a nearby bench. He opened a jar of rat spleens, said, "Whew, that's stinky," and threw it in the trash. A second later, the smell hit me. My knees buckled and I nearly vomited on the spot. I ran from the lab, and within half an hour, the entire third floor of the C wing of the medical school emptied out. A lot of researchers were pissed off at us that day. I learned about two powerful biochemicals, putrescine and cadaverine. Story 41, my So is a vet. The clinic she works at was a horribly mismanaged crap hole prior to her starting, which led to the clinic being shut down by some government body or other, and the entire upper management and most of the full-time vets being fired for negligence. She was brought in along with a few other vets to teach the remaining staff their asses from their elbows when they reopened, as they'd not been following best practices for the last couple of years, to put it mildly. One day, Maiso notices a kitten showing the clinical signs of a fairly easy-to-spot and extremely contagious feline disease. On inspecting the other kittens, they find nearly a dozen with the same symptoms. The procedure here is pretty straightforward. Lock the place down, quarantine the infected kittens, and no cats enter or leave until they've given the all clear. She leaves for the day and finds out the next day that, in her absence, one of the few vets who'd kept her job through the shutdown had decided to euthanize all of the infected kitten. If she were a human doctor, she'd be looking at multiple life sentences, or at least be fired for gross incompetence. But because they were all shelter kittens, cats who didn't even have vengeful owners to give a crap about them, she gets to continue practicing as a vet. Story 42. I work as a lifeguard, and we use walkie-talkies to communicate. One day, this guy drops a walkie-talkie into the pool. Instead of jumping in to grab it, he wanted to stay dry. So he leaned over the edge of the pool to try to grab it. Smart plan, only problem is that it was 4 feet deep, and no way his arms could reach it. So he keeps going further and further over the edge until he fell all the way in. The funny part is that if he jumped in the water first, he could have picked it up with his feet. Dude wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed story. 43, I'm a bartender, and one of my newer guys had been working and took care of a middle-aged man in the afternoon who came in with a young lady friend. The next day, when that guy came back with another woman, his wife, my new guy said, "Oh, hey, I figured out where I knew that girl you came in here yesterday with. She went to my high school. That patron never returned to our bar again." Story 44. We were cleaning weapons after about 30 hours on mission in one of those stand countries. It was one of our hotter routes, and rounds were exchanged on several occasions, and we are all fried, just dead dog tired. Well, one of the 50 cal gunners had not properly cleared his weapon and let a round off in our tent. No one was injured, and we managed to trace the bullet's path to a HESCO barrier. First time I saw one with a bullet hole on campsite, easily the most crap I have seen a soldier in. He was taken off mission and made fobgit, stripped of all rank, banned from all but his own personal weapon, and they even went so far as to take his firing pin. He was shipped back to the States about a month later, and I never saw him again. The full extent of his punishment was kept pretty hush-hush, so I have no idea what happened to him. Story 45, I've got a list. Putting gas in a diesel ambulance. A paramedic pulling the tube on a cardiac arrest patient because the second medic thought it was down the patient's right main stem. It was incorrectly, his right lung was just full of fluid. 2 more attempts to get him intubated resulted in a solid 60 seconds off the chest. A physician at a satellite air choosing to admit a chest pain patient to a floor for observation rather than see the St. elevation and depression on his EKG and activate the cath lab, saying this is a positive finding indicating a heart attack. In this case, a complete lat occlusion, aka the Widowmaker. My partner and I were transporting him anyway, so we took the liberty of activating the cath lab, driving very fast, and likely saving the man's life, or at least prolonging it significantly. The ear physician was subsequently chewed out by one of the cardiologists. I saw plenty of $100 parts broken on cars by mechanics I worked with when I was still working on cars. There were several cases that cost the shop hundreds in lost labor. Timing belts, 1 tooth off, were a major offender. Story 46. When I worked at Wendy's, we had to empty at least one of the fryers at the end of the night to clean. One of my buddies takes this cylindrical metal thing on wheels that goes under the fryer to empty the grease and aligns it appropriately. He turns the knob. It starts emptying and tries to walk over it. He proceeds to slip slightly, knocking the cylinder out of place and causing several gallons of 225 degrees Celsius grease all over the floor. The wheels on the neighboring appliances melted to the floor, and you could feel the heat coming off the floor. It took about a half hour until it cooled down so we could clean it up. Duckin', damn it. Story 47. While in the Navy, I worked on the electronic systems on P-3 aircraft. We needed to replace a Winchester plug on an aircraft. It's a plug-in with over 200 wires that plug into it. The guy I was with walked over to the plug-in and cut off all 200 wires in fell swoop. Normally, you would take one wire out at a time and transfer it into the new plug. We now had over 200 wires with no idea where any of them went. The plane ended up being grounded for over a month while we had to manually determine where every single wire went to on the plane, and then compare it to the plane's schematics. He was permanently transferred out of the shop after that incident into a desk job. Story 48, working at a live sound company, loading up a semi-trailer for a gig. The guy who backed it up didn't get it quite straight. General manager decides he can do better. Oh, and this was after we had already started packing. He actually does it fine once without issue, but it is off the dock just a little bit. So pulls out to try one more time, pops the clutch, and the trailer jumps just enough to set the vertex stacked. Too high come loose and start rolling off the back of the semi-truck. For those that don't know, these were speakers that cost over $3,000 each, and about 8 of them fell off the truck. So my day got real long real quick. I am just glad it was the general manager that did it and no one else. If it were someone else, he would have blew his lid at them. He did not hold back from cussing people out at work. But it was a great story to have in your back pocket. I was the only other person who saw it, but the amount of work it caused means everyone knew about it. Story 49, had a coworker in the late 90s get her glove caught in the chuck of a pipe machine, wrapped her hand and lower arm around it like a fruit roll-up. Gloves and power tools don't mix, kids. Story 50. I was working at this Japanese restaurant, and we had a new cook came in one day. He showed up drunk and almost burned the kitchen down. I had never seen my boss so angry before, and she was often in a crafty mood.